So I will now pass it over to the session chair, Jordan Stout, who will introduce the panel and our speakers for today.
Thank you. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. And I would like to, I guess, introduce myself since I'm scheduled first. I'm Jordan Stout. I'm from the University of British Columbia in the Okanagan. And I would also like to introduce Chris Bazgear, who is from the University of Auburn and will be speaking second. And my understanding on how this works is that we will have at least 15 minutes for questions after the two presentations. Okay, let me switch gears quickly and put up my slides. Okay, so I think everyone can see my slides now. And as I get started, I would like to acknowledge my colleague, Aisha Ravindran, who unfortunately cannot be here today due to medical reasons, but certainly has contributed significantly. And I would like to acknowledge that her insights really inspired this study. So I'll be missing her today. And I may also be occasionally referring to my notes more than I usually do, as I hadn't anticipated speaking to parts of this presentation until yesterday. So I apologize for that. I would also like to acknowledge that I'm speaking from the unceded territory of the Syilx Okanagan Nation, which is located in South Central British Columbia. As a settler scholar, I'm grateful for the privilege to work and live in this beautiful, although somewhat smoky today, area of the world. I'd also like to thank the host nations of the IWAC conference, particularly the Arapaho, the Cheyenne, and the Ute peoples. So today I'm going to be presenting ongoing work on new curriculum design at UBC, which we hope will shift institutional practices towards multilingual and increasingly diverse student population. This is a longitudinal study, which we are about halfway through. And as we were briefly discussing before the session started, it is situated in the Canadian university context, which, as I'm sure you know, has not developed first-year composition or the same kinds of writing across the curriculum approaches as United States institutions, although I think that's rapidly shifting. So to start with some institutional context, I thought it would be good to, oops, how did I do that? Share some information about our campus. UBC in the Okanagan was established as a satellite of Vancouver's larger UBC campus in 2005, and since then has seen some rapid growth from about 3,000 students to, as you can see now, over 10,000. The student population is becoming increasingly diverse, with both significant international, domestic, and Indigenous multilingual populations. So by 2018, it became clear that there was a need to provide courses that recognized both the needs and contributions of multilingual students. So an initial study we did on a course that had been in existence for some years previously revealed that there were real gaps in that course's approach. It tended to focus a lot on grammar and sentence level correctness, and also needed to emphasize knowledge transfer to other courses. So as often happens, we heard from faculty that students weren't well prepared. This timing also coincided with the revision of both our Bachelor of Arts and Bachelor of Science degrees, so that instead of simply requiring students to take an English course, sometimes composition, sometimes literature in first year, Now students would be required to take a writing focus course specifically at first year and then move into a second year course that would be more related to their intended disciplines. So it was an exciting time for change. And the course we developed, English 109, was, unlike most courses at the University of British Columbia, a 2-semester course designed to scaffold assignments carefully and use a multilingual writing across the curriculum approach. So today I'm going to focus on our data from 2019 to 2020. It is a 3-year study, so we will be adding to this data, but this was our first set of results. Okay, so our objectives in developing the course were to emphasize the shift to an asset-based mindset and a linguistically and culturally responsive pedagogy, and to prepare students to transfer their knowledge and assess genres and rhetorical needs as they moved into other courses in various disciplines. In developing the course and planning our study of its impact, our theoretical frameworks were, first of all, writing across the curriculum approaches, drawing both on the reciprocity between writing and learning, and writing's role as knowledge production in the disciplines. We also sought to develop a culturally and linguistically responsive curriculum, drawing from the work of Lucas and Villegas, our Vancouver colleague Sandra Zappa-Holman, and recent calls for linguistic justice. And finally, we were keen to apply this scholarship on adaptive transfer to prepare students for disciplinary writing as they progress through their degrees. So as we planned to study the pilot version of the course, we wanted to, of course, see how successful we had been. Our research questions related to the course design, linguistically and culturally responsive pedagogy, student agency, and the idea of adaptive transfer. So I think you can see on the screen the research questions in full detail there. And so our study was mixed methods with really 3 sets of data: curricular materials, student pre-surveys and post-surveys. So we asked students about their writing skills and sense of agency at the beginning of the course. And again, we asked the same questions at the end. And what I want to focus on in particular today, instructor interviews and student reflective writing. So today I will talk briefly about the first 2 data sets, the curricular documents and student surveys, and then I will elaborate a little bit more on the interviews and student reflective writing. The student reflective writing and interviews were analyzed using in vivo software and done through 2 researchers using constant comparative inquiry. Of course, we recognize that there is additional data to be added here, and that this is happening, as most such studies do, within a particular institutional context. Okay, so about curricular documents. One of the approaches that we spent a fair bit of time thinking about was how to guide students into the course. And we decided, following the work of Matsuda and others, that we did not want students to be required or placed in the course in English 109. Instead, we wanted to provide that as an option for them. And in fact, they had 8 different options to fulfill their first year communications requirement, and this was one of them. So we provided students with information about the course and let them select for themselves. And this meant that on our first pilot, as we began teaching the course, we had students who were both domestic and international multilingual students, students from a range of language backgrounds, And we also had monolingual students who identified themselves as having lower literacy skills and who wanted the 2-semester approach, which gave them added practice, more in-depth instruction, and a slower pace. So in most programs, after completing English 109, students will now move into a disciplinary focused writing course. So you can see some of those documents on the screen. In terms of the textbook, we selected a textbook specifically for multilingual students in the Canadian context called Advanced in Academic Writing. It includes peer-reviewed readings in a range of disciplines by international scholars, and it provides apparatus on the multilingual transition to university writing. We also scaffolded the assignments carefully. So students would, for instance, complete a summary on a popular article earlier in the course, and then by the second semester of the course would be completing a summary on a peer-reviewed article. So that's just one example of the kind of scaffolding we built into the course. In terms of the student survey, students were surveyed on their perceptions of their abilities and their transfer of knowledge to other courses at the beginning and end of the course, as I mentioned. Unfortunately, during this first year, our post-survey occurred in April 2020, which wasn't good for the numbers. Students, of course, were dealing with COVID, but the results, I'm just going to share a couple of quick examples, were positive, and we do hope to add to this data. So here is one of the questions which shows ask the activities and assignments in the course provided me with sufficient practice to develop my writing and research skills, and almost all the students replied positively. Here's another example. We asked if after completing this course, students felt confident about their writing and communication skills in other courses at university. And again, the majority did. Not everyone felt completely confident, as maybe we would expect at the end of first year. But they did seem to feel more confident at the end of the course. All right, so I really wanted to focus today on the instructor interviews and student reflective writing. And as I mentioned, these responses were analyzed using in vivo and a comparative inquiry approach. And through this, we identified 3 themes that I want to talk about today: student agency in writing across the curriculum, cultural and linguistic responsive pedagogy, and also knowledge transfer. We recognize that, of course, writing across the curriculum and knowledge transfer are related, but we wanted to pull out some of those ideas specifically about transfer to other courses. So here are a couple of quotations from our first theme, student agency in writing across the curriculum. And we thought student C was particularly interesting. There were a number of quotes along this line about how the course was helpful, but student C in particular said, "The course English 109 has aided me to develop a more academic approach to writing. It has helped me focus on academic writing holistically rather than just focusing on one sector. It has made me a better and more competent writer, which is reflected through my work in this course and other courses at university as well." So we thought this was interesting in that the student was viewing the course as kind of a holistic tool for discovery and for learning, and identifying their developing agency as a writer. Student R also made some interesting comments, writing, "There has been significant change in the way I write academically. My academic communication with my professors and teaching assistants has changed for the better. I now communicate in a more academically appropriate manner." And both Aisha and I found this interesting in terms of raising the question about what is academically appropriate. And of course, one of our interests through this study is seeing how students may accept but also come to challenge or even shift understandings of what appropriate academic discourse is. So we're interested to see how that idea may develop in further pieces of writing. We also, of course, invited input from instructors. Instructor 2 writes, right from the beginning, since the focus was on genre and on navigating within the academic context, I was constantly reiterating the need for them to connect whatever was taught in this course to other courses. When they engaged in self-reflection, when they wrote about their experiences, one of the things that I think many of the students stated was how impactful this was. And indeed, the reflective writing, I think we identified in a number of quotations like this was a very sort of important and impactful practice in this course. And then students D, we also found quite interesting. Student D wrote, generally speaking, I think I made progress on my writing and learned a lot, not only as a writer, but also as a student. And these 2 points are both important to my future study. So student D seemed to be identifying writing and learning and the interconnection between them as particularly important to their developing identity. So our second theme focused more on instructor perceptions. We were interested in how the instructors perceived our culturally and linguistic responsive pedagogy and how they felt that worked and how they actually employed it within the classroom. So instructor 2 was asking about the practices in the classroom and said, how do the instructors see this pedagogical space? Do we allow for example, multilingualism or bilingualism or translingual processes, code meshing, for example? Are we allowing something like that? Some of these concepts exist in the field of applied linguistics, but how many writing instructors are willing to actually incorporate these into their classrooms, rather than following a very standardized notion of what an English course should be? So this touches on one of our sort of important goals with this study and with this course, which is to shift people's mindsets away from an immediate sort of remedial approach to multilingual writing towards viewing the possibilities and the assets that multilingual learners bring to our classrooms and how we can shift our teaching practices to allow that. And instructor 3, I always find it very interesting in what concrete strategies people bring into their classroom. So instructor 3 notes that with multilingual learners, I think that's what I myself as a learner am most comfortable when I can bring in my background and experiences and kind of commingle with other learning expectations. So this instructor, recognizing this is a long quote, very consciously asked students to bring in, as she says, those little bits of what they would want to share about themselves, about their learning strategies, learning styles, and those multiple experiences, and letting them really explore what it is like to write and learn in the classroom. So in another quotation, this instructor recalled they read an article about Indigenous language revitalization, and she asked the students to share experiences of Indigenous languages from their backgrounds. And so bringing that kind of experience in to enrich the classroom was something that this instructor was very consciously doing. And then our final theme related to the adaptive transfer of skills. We were specifically interested in how or whether students were recognizing this. And we found that students really were. Student C2 was quite representative, saying, I intend to major in sociology, which requires analyzing a plethora of research, writing a multitude of essays and response papers. Therefore, to do well in social science, an essential requirement is to have good writing and analyzing skills. Taking the course English 109 has helped me enhance these very skills. And instructor 3 also recognized that there were a lot of students from different disciplines, noting a lot of students from psychology, a few from sociology as well, which are all writing intensive courses. So the challenge initially for them was to connect, like how are they different and how are they the same? So I can write a lab report, but how do I do argumentation in the lab report? Does that even fall within the purview of a lab report? So that was the learning that she writes, the children, students were challenging themselves to accomplish. Okay, so to sum up, I think we found in relation to research questions 1 and 2 that this 2-semester small class design, the scaffolding and the reflective and recursive writing did result in increased student agency and acculturation. We also found that educational accountability and criticality were embedded in the course design through multimodal, multicultural, and multilingual teaching practices, and that interdisciplinary course design encouraged skill transfer. So we recognize that this is a pilot study, but we hope that it contains insights for teachers, administrators, and policymakers to better empower students' interdisciplinary transition and socialization. And we also, I think, very strongly feel that the shift to an asset-oriented mindset regarding second language teaching and learning, which recognizes, as Gonzalez, Mull, and Amante say, funds of knowledge, is particularly important, and maybe particularly important now as we align ourselves with the 4C call for linguistic justice. And we hope that we can advance that as we continue to study this course and make curriculum changes on our campus. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Jordan. That's really interesting. I look forward to talking about it a little bit more. I am gonna work on sharing my screen here. Let's see, can you all see my PowerPoint okay? Yes, all right, cool. So as Jordan said, I'm Chris Baskier. I'm at Auburn University, which is located on the occupied ancestral territory of the Muskogee Creek Nation. Also, we happen to have severe thunderstorms rolling through right now, so hopefully we make it through. I'm in the library, so we don't tend to lose power here, but it's not unheard of. So if I lose you, I'll come back as soon as I can. So today I'm going to be talking about assessing faculty members' threshold concepts for the teaching of writing in disciplines, and talking a little bit through quantitative versus narrative methods for that. And recently, WAC scholars have begun examining faculty's conceptions of writing pedagogy in disciplinary contexts, and threshold concepts hold promise as a framework for investigating the ways of thinking about writing pedagogy. And the threshold concepts framework holds that certain difficult concepts that are often referred to as troublesome knowledge can act as irreversible gateways to an academic discipline's ways of knowing or doing or communicating. And over the recent years, scholars have been active in applying the threshold concepts framework to WAC challenges and outcomes. And as I have on the screen here, Chris Anson argues that threshold concepts in WAC can encourage faculty to think in principled ways about incorporating writing in their courses, regardless of discipline. Because of the diversity of backgrounds in those who are seeking assistance in teaching disciplinary writing, WAC professionals may find themselves wondering how best to gauge faculty participants' threshold concept crossings. So in a previous study, my colleague Amber Simpson and I showed how faculty narratives could reveal different stages of understanding about threshold concepts for the teaching of writing in the disciplines. We created a travel metaphor that we use as a heuristic for analyzing faculty members' narratives that included roadblocks when they couldn't see a way through a teaching difficulty, detours when they tried an isolated change with limited success, and journeys when they told detailed stories of multifaceted solutions that manifested conceptual changes. So using this heuristic, we identified 3 threshold concepts for the teaching of writing in the disciplines that included effective writing pedagogy involves iterative, multifaceted change. This is kind of a meta concept. Students' development as writers can be scaffolded through, could be supported through scaffolded interventions, and genres can be taught as actions, not just as forms. I think these will probably sound familiar. They weren't revolutionary, but it was interesting to see them from the faculty members' perspectives, kind of confirmatory that these are tricky things that not everybody kind of gets intuitively. It takes some enculturation, I think, into kind of WAC pedagogy in order to really start to get them and be able to vocalize them. So given these findings, I started wondering whether the threshold concepts that were suggested by our research and by WAC literature could be converted into a survey instrument that could be used to assess changes in faculty thinking after they participated in a WAC program like a summer institute or a workshop of one sort or another. So to answer these questions, this question, I created a quantitative inventory of approaches to teaching writing to measure and assess faculty's threshold concepts for teaching writing in the disciplines. So in the rest of the presentation, I'm going to discuss some of the difficulties that my colleague Leslie Cordy and I faced in validating the instrument, and I end by returning to narrative methods as a framework for identifying and assessing threshold concepts for teaching writing in the disciplines. And just as a note, Leslie couldn't join us today. And for the sake of clarity, I took primary responsibility for the survey design, and Leslie and I collaborated on the validation process that I'll discuss. So I designed the inventory to measure faculty's relative commitment to 6 concepts that were derived from the scholarly literature in WAC and from my own previous research. And I'll just give quick thumbnail sketches of each of those. The first one is writing as a general skill, which emphasizes rules and common expectations for writing. Faculty who hold this perspective typically focus on grammar and other surface issues when they comment on student writing, but they may also not feel any obligation to comment on student writing at all. Often they believe that students ought to have learned how to write before enrolling in their course. You know, why didn't they learn this in English? Or that students are inherently good or bad writers, which means that writing instruction is not their responsibilities. I think a lot of us in the room would consider this more of a pre-threshold concept with its focus on what David Russell calls writing as an autonomous skill generalizable to all activity systems. The next one is writing development, which involves supporting students' growth as writers. So faculty with the commitment to writing development generally wish to help students improve as writers by teaching them the features of effective writing or the expectations for writing in a particular course. They may see themselves preparing students to write effectively in future communicative situations, some of the transfer-oriented mindsets that Jordan mentioned, and they may also wish to help students develop identities as writers. Writing in the disciplines involves preparing students to write in specific academic disciplines, professions, or fields. Faculty with a commitment to WID often ask students to use writing as a means of practicing the ways of thinking that characterize a discipline or profession or field. They may use writing to help students answer questions, explore hypotheses, analyze data or texts, or intervene in disciplinary debates. Others with a commitment to writing in the disciplines may emphasize correct and appropriate use of technical vocabulary like jargon, as well as the genres or forms that are common in a particular field. And finally, some faculty members may use writing to help students connect their personal lives to the work of a discipline, profession, or field as well. Writing to learn, unsurprisingly, involves using writing to help students understand and engage with the content of a course. So faculty working from a writing to learn perspective might assign low stakes writing tasks that help students engage with readings, practice applying course concepts and hypothetical situations, or generally speaking, wrestle with complexity. And some may be especially committed to the potential for writing to promote students' critical thinking abilities. Writing as a process involves helping students manage a range of activities involved in the writing process, particularly for complex projects. Faculty with a commitment to writing as a process often want to help students learn to work with sources or with data iteratively, So they scaffold assignments into manageable tasks with increasing complexity. And they build in opportunities for peer and instructor feedback. And they may guide students in using that feedback to revise effectively. And then finally, writing is rhetorical, involves explicit attention to audience, purpose, genre, and context. And often faculty who teach writing from a rhetorical perspective develop assignments with realistic rhetorical context in mind, or they might even engage student in authentic writing assignments for real world audiences. Others who are committed to a rhetorical approach for writing pedagogy may ask students to analyze rhetorical situations and develop plans for creating effective pieces of communication for those situations. So those are the core concepts that I developed these definitions for. And then I created survey items that I believed would measure faculty members' relative commitment to each conception. So I've never imagined that somebody would only do writing to learn or would only do writing as a general skill, although that one may be a little bit more likely than the others to kind of be emphasized. Rather, it was always going to be about proportions and relative commitments there. As I was developing the survey items, I adapted a framework from Daniel Pratt and his associates who created the Teaching Perspectives Inventory. The TPI measured 5 broad concepts for teaching in general, and their items were grouped according to actions, intentions, and beliefs. According to Pratt, actions are the routines and techniques we use to engage people in content. Intentions are an expression of what a person is trying to accomplish, and usually an indication of a role and responsibility in pursuit of that. And beliefs represent underlying values that drive actions and intentions. So using this framework, I wrote items that represented actions, belief, and intentions that I believe were associated with each of the 6 concepts that I've defined. And then my aim was to score faculty's responses using a 5-point Likert scale on each item. And so the survey was designed to provide a numerical representation of how much they were committed to each conception. And then I also plan to include subscores for actions, intentions, and beliefs so that we might be able to track if any one of those elements was misaligned with the other. So somebody might intend to work from kind of a writing to learn perspective, but their actions may actually reinforce writing as a general skill, for example. So Leslie and I wanted to establish the inventory's content validity. So we wanted to provide evidence that the items that we created actually do measure the content or the construct, or in this case, the threshold concept that they are defined to measure. So to do so, we used an index of item objective congruence, which uses a panel of experts. This would be a group of people in the field who are familiar with the subject that the instrument purports to measure. And they judge the appropriateness of the items in measuring one or more of the constructs. We wanted to make sure that the threshold concepts that were represented in the inventory were representative of concepts that would be recognizable to other WAC scholars, and so therefore portable to other WAC contexts outside of our own. So after IRB approval, we emailed the inventory to 43 individuals from a range of institution types who I had identified as experts in writing studies with backgrounds in WAC. And the survey included demographic data such as institution, number of years working in WAC, and the list of the definitions for the 6 concepts, and then instructions on how to complete the inventory. We didn't tell the experts which concepts the individual items were intended to measure, so that they could remain independent of independent evaluators of the survey. And each expert was asked to evaluate each item by giving it a rating of 1, which meant the item clearly measured the particular concept. A -1, it clearly did not measure that concept, and a 0, it's not clear whether it was measuring that concept or not. And then for each item, our goal was to get a 70% agreement rate across the experts. Some general results, we had 18 WAC experts respond, so about a 42% response rate. And we had 2 assistant professors, 4 associate professors, 6 full 2 clinical, 1 visiting, and 3 others, so a wide range of types of respondents, and they had worked in WAC WID on average about 19 years, with a minimum of 5 and a maximum of 41. So lots of different background and experience. After reading the definitions of the 6 concepts, 15 agreed or strongly agreed that they could distinguish among the definitions. 1 respondent neither agreed nor disagreed, and 2 disagreed. And those differences of opinion didn't appear to differ according to rank or years of experience in the field. The analysis of their evaluations was conducted on SPSS, and it indicated that out of all 36 items in the inventory, only 1 met the minimum level of significance. It's the one I've highlighted here. It's one of the writing as a general skill items. The rest of the items were below that 0.7 threshold, or when you look at the relationship between the item and each individual possible construct, it may be that they were able to align with multiple of the different threshold concepts. So we actually conducted a second analysis of multidimensional items, and you can see that in the left-hand column here. And again, same results. We didn't get anything that was meeting that 0.7 threshold that we were trying to get at for validation purposes. So I think these results suggest that we may be able to develop reasonably distinct definitions of different concepts for teaching writing in the disciplines, but faculty members' actual actions, intentions, and beliefs are probably too interconnected to be neatly aligned to isolable constructs. And in fact, we had some qualitative comments from the participants that extend this interpretation. For instance, 1 respondent said, "These 6 conceptions or labels for writing instruction are not discrete or separate, at least not for me and the faculty I work with, the teachers I prepare, etc. WID is rhetorical and includes attention to process and has elements of writing to learn. And in all writing instruction, I see or want to see attention to the development of the writer." Or similarly, these categories seem to me to be aspects that are present in nearly any writing classroom. I have difficulty separating them in many cases. A good writing teacher would make use of toolkits from any of these categories. I guess one might find some instructors who tend more in one direction, but the longer one teaches, the more one draws from all of these approaches. The expert panelists also suggested that the 6 constructs I had developed might not be fully representative of the full range of conceptions for teaching writing in the disciplines. So when I asked whether they could think of other conceptions, one expert noted writing for critical consciousness, another noted civic writing, and then several responses pointed to the link between writing and what we might broadly call kind of personal growth and well-being. So one of them mentioned writing as an aid in maintaining and improving psychological health as a potential conception. So I think these indicate that the WAC experts who took the inventory and the index survey did not believe that the survey item represented the full range of beliefs, intentions, and actions that might characterize faculty members' threshold concepts for teaching writing in the disciplines. If I added them to the survey, they may still be hard to distinguish from other conceptions. I think it's pretty clear, for instance, that civic writing would require significant attention to writing as rhetorical, and writing in pedagogies that involve psychological well-being or identity could intersect with a developmental understanding of writing acquisition. So it may be possible to measure faculty members' conceptions quantitatively, but this particular instrument was not a valid measure for doing so. And here I would just note Adler-Kasser and Wardle, who maintain that threshold concepts are contingent, contextual, threshold for now, so they can't be used as a checklist or reduced to easily accessible, ready to digest ideas. And so the results of our validation study, I think, provide some empirical backing for their claim. And I also think they have some methodological implications for future research. So there is no methodological consensus about best ways to identify and study threshold concepts, but qualitative methods do appear to be the most common. And I think my previous research has showed that narratives can be useful, as can reflective practice, for engaging faculty in the kinds of thinking about their knowledge that can engender changed conceptions. storytelling and reflection give faculty members the opportunity, I think, to retain ownership of the ways they think about and talk about the teaching of writing in the disciplines, rather than kind of being pigeonholed by a survey. And I actually think that these kinds of narratives and reflections can still be leveraged as assessment mechanisms when they're focused on learning and implementation of specific pedagogies that are germane to WAC. Narrative and reflection can help administrators gauge the extent of faculty members' changed thinking. They also complement the theory of threshold concepts. Thresholds are something one passes through, and even though the metaphor is a spatial one, that passing through also has a temporal dimension that can be plotted and narrativized, right? So the process of learning is messy and it's rarely linear, but we humans have this way of using narrative to make sense of what would otherwise be a messy stream of unbroken sensory experiences and mental phenomena. So through narrative methods, we can see how faculty encounter difficult WAC concepts, how they wrestle with them, how they test them, and ideally eventually internalize them as principled ways of thinking about disciplinary writing pedagogy. Now, narrative methods can be labor intensive and prohibitive, especially for those annual assessment reports. So I'm still interested in finding ways of capturing faculty learning through a quantitative instrument, but maybe a different kind of question type that might directly ask the extent to which somebody has changed their particular way of thinking about their teaching of writing could work instead. So as WAC continues working with threshold concepts as a framework for research and assessment into faculty learning, the field will need to identify robust methodological tools that can capture the integrative complexity of the conceptual terrain that characterizes teaching writing in the disciplines. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. That was wonderful. Okay, I think we have almost exactly 15 minutes for questions. So let me just get I see somebody's hand up. Where is it? Laura.
Hi, thank you. And I guess I don't have a question, but I do have an observation, and I'm thinking a lot about what Chris just covered. And even though it may be that the sort of tool he was trying to create didn't work exactly as he was hoping for because of the interrelationship of all these things, wow, it sure is important for us to evaluate our reasons for doing things sort of constantly and looking at what our goals are, and making that list of concepts was I think really valuable. And so I made a screenshot of that and of the other three that the other people thought of, because I'm like, I need to be thinking about these things every summer when I sit down to do my summertime reassess. Like I'm gonna like just tape this list up on the wall and say, where am I coming from now? And should I assess one of these concepts, and am I missing one, and that sort of thing. And so I'm sorry your tool didn't work out, but thank you for sharing the concepts. I do think it's really valuable.
Thank you for that, Laura. I appreciate it. I'm glad you found the concepts valuable.
Daniel, I think I see your hand up. Is that?
My hand was up, but I also saw Terry raise her hand, and I'm more interested in hearing her question, so I'll go second.
Okay.
Thinking about the connection between these two talks. And so Jordan, yours was self-report from the students and the faculty. So a narrative approach. And I'm thinking about how, so I might have missed it, but how you might follow that with a quantitative approach, but also how, if you have plans after time passes to go back to those students or informants to ask them, now that time has passed, what is their thinking now about the same questions? And in a sense, it goes to Chris's topic, because it's what's transferred, what's the threshold that might have been passed, or that those students that you reported on, Jordan, think that they've gotten through somehow, or have at least dealt with and struggled with it. And afterwards, can you make some kind of quantitative assessment or continue with the narrative analysis? I'm not sure if I'm totally clear about that. I'm trying to make a connection here, because I think there is, and I think it has to do with the validity of narrative data.
Maybe I'll just jump in with a thought. We did include the survey component in an attempt to get at some more quantitative data. But of course, it is the students' perceptions of their own accomplishments, which are likely to change. So we do have subsequent plans to follow up. As I was explaining, this is a sort of initial component of what will probably be a larger study, in that we do have those disciplinary related second year courses coming, and we've developed this in a communications and rhetoric kind of program. So our idea is to be, hopefully, before these students graduate, be able to follow up with them by the end of their time at UBC Okanagan, and see what their perceptions have changed. I suspect, and I was also really interested in Chris's talk, in the sense that our thresholds are not sort of fixed. Thresholds change. So for the first year students we were talking to, they felt that they were transferring their skills, but of course we know that they're going to continue to develop new skills and new ways to transfer their learning in different formats. So I wasn't going to tell the students this, but they are by no means done, right? There's a lot more for them to do. So just some thoughts from our perspective, but Chris, I'm sure you have ideas as well.
I just add that if they're going to take, if you can get those same students in that next course, to ask them what they did take from the one before that they're carrying into that next course, or any of them, you know, that are in that next course.
Which could make some really interesting administrative information for first year teaching in particular.
Yeah, and I like that longitudinal perspective as well. I just don't think we do enough of it still, despite like multiple calls over the years from various researchers to do more longitudinal research. But also, you know, at least if we're thinking about conceptual change, you know, generally speaking, at least the theory of threshold concept says that once you internalize it, it's irreversible. It may evolve and nuance and get interconnected with other kinds of concepts, but it's pretty hard to unlearn one unless I think there's like a paradigm shift in your field that completely overturns it, you know. So in a way, down the line, they ought to still be telling interesting stories about the way they think about writing, in like in the case, Jordan, of your students, even if they're not the same stories that they have told after this first course, but that those stories ought to evince deepened understanding of you know, the concepts that you're dealing with, I would think.
One of the things I was thinking about, it was whether, Jordan, you have pre-post data on confidence. So when I saw that there are some students who are like, I'm not confident moving forward, what I thought was, those are probably the students who weren't confident to begin with. And there's really interesting things that happen. We've done some work on self-conception in students writing in biological sciences. And you end up, if you get a big enough sample, you end up seeing these cool things where like this population of mostly male undergraduates have a dip in their confidence, and it's probably helpful, because they come in like super overconfident about how well they understand these concepts, and that moment of humility may be useful. And then you have another population of students who come in woefully underconfident, are extremely successful and then are only barely more confident but at the end. So, and again, it falls on gender lines and it falls on racial lines. There's just all kinds of really cool things that you can do with this. You know, the more iterations that you get in time series, the richer this data is going to be. So super cool project. One of the things I was thinking of is like the students who are the most concerned, right? When you said, you know, some students selecting here because they feel like they want to go slower, that feeling of, you know, I'm assigning myself to this intentionally, you know, there's a self-efficacy goal, but they may have already internalized some deficit-oriented models of writing that they're just for the first time getting a chance to handle. So that the student who says, I feel like I'm getting better and it's more academically appropriate, like they might really have sensed themselves as being a kind of writer who is academically inappropriate previously. And this is seen as a positive change or transformation. Ideally, maybe we could get folks to challenge those value-laden sort of languages about, you know, propriety and appropriateness and say, oh, I'm learning a new set of skills, another way of talking in addition to the ways that I already have.
Yeah, those are great points. Certainly, I didn't have a chance to show all the survey data, but this group of students in particular were very underconfident. I think both the students who registered in the course for that reason, but also a lot of the multilingual students were very underconfident and recorded, you know, being most terrified of their English or communications course coming to a Canadian university. So, you know, yes, I think they have been given, even before they arrive, some of those remedial models. And then, you know, the data was very positive, at least from this first year, I think, because honestly, they seem to be surprised to be sort of recognized and not treated as so remedial. And so I think that'll be an interesting part of the data to continue observing. And maybe, you know, if we start changing some of the discourse, the confidence increase will sort of level out. I don't know, but it's certainly something I'm looking forward to seeing. Caitlin.
First, I just want to thank you both for these presentations. They were really, really interesting and useful to me. And I just, Jordan, wanted to give a shout out to an article that you might already have, but it's by Dana Driscoll, and it's called Clashing Values, a longitudinal exploratory study of student beliefs about general education, vocationalism, and transfer of learning. I can send that to you instead of writing it down. But basically, yeah, she shows that students have different perceptions of the value of their gen ed classes in the second year of school than they do in the first year. And so I just think that it would be a really interesting complement to the work you're doing, especially if you turn it into a longitudinal project. And she only has 14 participants in her study. So I think that you're good with your 12 as well.
Yeah, well, we hope to add more. It was unfortunate to be doing it right at the time COVID hit. But thank you for that article. It sounds really interesting. We haven't expanded to look at general education yet, so that would be great. Daniel, I see your hand up. Yep,
it's up again. I took it down because I wanted to ask Chris a question too. So, but if somebody else wants to jump in, either way. But the thing that I'm really interested in about your project, Chris, is I think maybe the problem is that 6 constructs is too much. Like if we could look at, you know, just the move from writing as skill to writing as process, or writing as skill, writing as technical skill versus writing as rhetorical act, that might really create that might be, you know, it'd be easier to sort of disentangle those 2 constructs, right? Like maybe the buffet was just, there were too many good items for me to pick from when I was thinking of, you know, across the 5 additional items. But I think that's really interesting. The other thing that I'm thinking about is, it'd be cool to peg those features to some of the existing scholarly research on epistemological beliefs among faculty. Like how do faculty believe knowledge exists? Like, do they view it as, definite or contingent? Do they view it as, I mean, a lot of that kind of language, and usually they really do try to create these kind of dichotomous variables to make it easier to build the construct. So that was one of the things that I was thinking is you could sort of, I bet you could run a pretty tight line between, like if you divided it simply between the skill people and the rhetoric people, to say the rhetoric people use these kinds of tools in their classes, like metacognitive activities. And the folks in the writing a skill use repeated lab reports graded according to a stylistic rubric. I bet that would kind of, it'd open it up a little bit.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. I had just heard the other day from somebody somewhere, I can't remember where, about a survey question type that basically, it's like it's a different version of a scaled response where you just have your polls and then they do they drag between the two polls. And so I can imagine each poll being kind of like a most extreme version of a concept that are kind of opposed to each other in some way. And then they're dragging it across in that way. That's an interesting thought about how to do that. In terms of, never mind, lost my train of thought. I apologize. Jordan, I had a quick question for you, actually. Could you, I know we've got like 2 minutes, could you maybe unpack one of the assignments and how it, in your mind, enacts culturally and linguistically responsive pedagogy?
Yeah, in terms of the actual assignments?
Yeah, like, just one of them. I would just love a detailed example of what one of the assignments looks like.
Yeah, we didn't require all of these. We had multiple sections of the course, I should say, and we didn't require the same assignment from every section. So there was going to be some variation, but well, the one instructor that I was mentioning, who was, I think, really giving a lot of thought to being culturally and linguistically inclusive, did ask students to write about their experiences with languages, particularly from their own background, as one of the initial assignments in the course, as a way to try and sort of bring in and value that experience, and relating it then to the textbook, which had readings on the transition into university writing for multilingual students. So as a very sort of first assignment, she described doing this and having students bring in their experiences. We did spend a lot of time thinking about, you know, such a diverse classroom, because we really were dealing with students from so many different backgrounds and language backgrounds, and trying to find assignments and pedagogy that would value those unique experiences. So certainly there was that. And then a lot of the assignments, just to give people an idea, were really about letting students choose their approaches within certain parameters to try and, again, bring in those very diverse experiences. But if other people have done other kinds of assignments, we'd love to hear, because that was one of the things that sort of as a group, as a teaching group, we spent a lot of time discussing. How can we actually do this within the classroom and given the kinds of students we have here? So I hope that helps. I see a couple of comments in the chat. I hope I haven't missed anything. Daniel's saying it would be interesting to talk about the distinctions between Canada and Indigenous and international languages. Yeah.
I think that would be a fascinating topic, and given the politics of North American boarding schools and the effort to destroy Indigenous languages and Indigenous populations, I mean, the the pedagogies of language instruction have had a genocidal history in North America in the 20th century. And that's something that we really can talk about. And I think that it clearly influences how students speaking native first languages understand themselves in relationship to the university. Like, students are awake to the fact that institutions like ours participated in genocide. So it hits me at a very visceral level that there's such an interesting, and Canada's a country that accepts, English and French in Canada as a deal, right? I mean, that's a matter of national policy, is that there are some kinds of linguistic difference that are to be valued as a part of state sanction. And then there were other languages that were absolutely not to be valued. And I think that the historical connection there is just fascinating.
Yeah, it's a huge topic, and something that very much, given the discoveries, not even really discoveries, but events at residential schools in Canada recently have brought about, and our new Governor General, who does not speak French, but speaks Inuit and English. And so it has very much been a topic of conversation, and something that at UBC, we have our first Indigenous revitalization degree here. And so we're very much thinking about it, but I see it's past time. So I don't want to get into too far into it, but you're absolutely right. It's a really, really interesting issue to think about how languages are valued. And it is part of our motivation in some of this pedagogy.